A simple woman was denied a room in her billionaire husband's luxury hotel. The staff humiliated her in front of everyone. But when he arrived and saw what they had done, his reaction left the entire hotel staff in shock. And this is where our story begins. The revolving doors of the Elmont Grand Hotel spun gently, like a carousel made of glass and quiet judgment. And then stepped a woman named Clara Elmont. She moved slowly, her steps quiet, almost hesitant, as if she already knew this place might not welcome her. The contrast was striking. Here she was, in paint-speckled clothes, soft canvas sneakers, a well-worn tote slung over her shoulder, walking into a palace made of light and gold. Crystal chandeliers glimmered above her like upside-down stars. Velvet armchairs stood proud beside polished marble columns. A faint melody from a baby grand piano curled through the air like a lullaby. Guests moved about in tailored coats and soft leather shoes, their laughter like the clinking of fine crystal. And Clara was tired, kind of tired that lives in your bones. After a day spent teaching underprivileged children how to shape color into courage, after wiping tiny hands smudged with clay, after listening, truly listening, to the small voices no one else heard, she didn't care what she looked like. She cared that she'd made it through the day. And she cared that her husband Julian, yes, that Julian Elmont, the billionaire hotel magnate, had told her to stop here, to rest, to take a room for the night. "I'll let the front desk know," he'd said, his voice warm with the quiet affection that defined them. She hadn't even asked, he offered, because he knew she'd give everything away, even her comfort, for someone else's smile. So when she stepped up to the glossy reception counter, her hands still smelling faintly of linseed oil and chalk, she smiled softly and said, "Hi there, I'm Clara Elmont. My husband should have called ahead just for a room tonight." Two staff members stood behind the counter. One was a young man in a tailored vest, his name tag said Lucas. Beside him, a woman with sleek hair and a clipped posture. Her tag read Marissa. They looked up from their screens and paused. There. Eyes scanned her, not kindly. Lucas glanced at Marissa, then back at Clara. "Elmont?" he asked, skeptical. "Yes," Clara replied. Gently, there was no arrogance in her tone, just softness and a quiet certainty, the kind that didn't need proving. Marissa gave a small, amused smile. Her eyes flicked to Clara's jeans, the rolled sleeves, the frayed edges of her tote bag. "I'm afraid we don't have any bookings under that name," she said, sweetly fake. Her voice was the kind people use when they think they're being polite while laughing inside. Clara nodded. "He said he'd call ahead. I'm sure it's under Julian Elmont." Lucas raised his eyebrows. "Julian Elmont?" he repeated, like the name didn't quite belong in her mouth. "Ma'am, are you suggesting you're married to Mr. Elmont?" Clara blinked once. Marissa let out a breath that was halfway between a scoff and a chuckle. "We've had people try this before," she said, leaning slightly on the desk. "I understand the appeal. But we really can't offer rooms based on stories, you see?" Clara smiled again, softer this time almost, sad. "I'm not telling you a story," she said. "I'm just trying to check in." Lucas shook his head. "No record of any reservation," he said, his voice now clipped. "And unfortunately, we're fully booked tonight. Perhaps you could try a different, or maybe a guest house nearby," Marissa offered, eyes flicking, toward the security guard behind the lobby plants. "Something more. Your speed." The words weren't loud, but a few heads turned nearby. A couple at the lounge bar glanced over. A concierge across the lobby froze mid-step, and Clara stood there. Still as a breath held in the dark. She wasn't angry. Not yet. Just tired, embarrassed. Not for herself. No. For them, because they had no idea. Clara stood quietly, not needing to argue, not needing to raise her voice. She had lived long, enough to know that sometimes people tell you exactly who they are, by how they treat you when they think you're no one. She reached into her pocket for her phone. The screen lit up softly. a warm glow in the cool lobby air. She scrolled, found the message from Julian, and opened it. There it was. His usual tone, playful and loving, told the front desk, "You're on your way. Suite 1702 is ready. Sleep in, darling. You've earned it." She turned the screen toward Lucas. He didn't lean in, didn't even look. Instead, he sighed and nodded at Marissa. "Ma'am," Marissa said, voice now harder, "I have a policy. No impersonations. If you refuse to leave, we'll have to involve security." Clara's hands fell back to her sides. Still no anger, no panic, only silence. Like the kind that settles on snow before a storm, behind her. The doorman had started walking toward her slow, hesitant steps. The concierge looked uncomfortable now, pretending to be busy with papers he wasn't really reading. 2 guests. One, in a long velvet coat, stared openly. Clara felt her cheeks flush, not from shame, but from something deeper. The familiar burn of being misjudged. And just as Marissa opened her mouth to speak again, the revolving doors turned once, twice, and in walked Julian. Helmo. No. No booming footsteps. No booming footsteps. No entourage. Just quiet. Confident movement like he belonged in every room, but never needed to prove it. A long charcoal coat flowed behind him. His hair salt and pepper. Swept back, looked like it had been mussed by the wind just moments ago. Sharp eyes scanned the lobby, until they softened completely. When they found her, Clara, everything about him changed. His shoulders dropped, his stride quickened. "Clara," he said, warmth pouring into the syllables of her name like sunlight. And just like that, entire energy in the room shifted. Lucas froze. Marissa's lips parted, a silent gasp she couldn't hide in time. Clara blinked and smiled. Julian reached her in just a few strides, cupping her cheeks in his hands as if she were the only person in the world. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I should have called you, not just them." He kissed her forehead gently, then turned, slowly, purposefully. And when he faced the front desk, his expression was not angry, it was disappointed. And somehow, that was so much worse. "You turned her away," he said, voice calm. "But, laced with steel beneath the velvet, you humiliated my wife in our hotel." Lucas looked pale now. "I, Mr. Elmont, we didn't." Julian raised a hand, not to silence him, but to spare him from digging deeper. "She gave you her name, she showed you proof, and still, you saw her clothes, her face, and you made a decision." He looked around the lobby now, addressing not just the staff, but the space itself. "I built this place to feel like home. For everyone, not just the ones who wear wealth like armor. My wife is the heart of everything I value, and tonight you made her feel small in a place that bears our name." Marissa stepped back, her voice faltering. "We didn't know you." "Didn't ask," Julian replied, voice low, and that was the truth. Clara stood a step behind him now, her hands folded, calm as ever. This was not revenge. It wasn't vengeance. It was simply justice. Spoken aloud, Julian reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a keycard. "Clara," he said, turning back to her, "the suite is ready. Let's go up. I'll handle everything here," she nodded. But before turning, she gently placed a hand on his arm. Her voice was soft, the kind that could soothe even a storm. "Julian, don't fire them." He looked surprised. "After the way they treated you?" She gave a small shrug. "They're not kind, but maybe they've never been taught what kindness looks like until now." He looked at her. Really looked, then slowly, he nodded. And as they walked away, arm in arm, the entire lobby seemed to exhale, as if something sacred had passed through it. A woman in the velvet coat whispered to her husband. That was his wife. And the man replied, "That was Grace, my dear. That's what you just saw." And behind the desk, Lucas and Marissa stood, still humbled, and perhaps quietly changed. The elevator chimed softly as it opened. Clara stepped inside first, the golden. Interior, glowing, warm and silent. Julian followed, close, protective. Proud, they didn't speak right away. They didn't need to. The quiet between them was the kind that only grows between two people who've truly seen each other in good times, in quiet ones, in days when the world misunderstood. Nights like this, as the elevator rose, the city lights shimmered through the glass wall behind them. Each floor passed like a heartbeat, soft, measured, peaceful. Julian watched her. Not her clothes, not her clothes, not her tired eyes, but the way she stood. Still, gentle, even now. You always amaze me, he whispered, his voice low, just for her. Clara smiled faintly. Why? He leaned slightly closer, pressing his shoulder to hers. Because even when people don't see you clearly, you never stop seeing them. She shrugged softly, her cheek brushing his shoulder. I used to get angry, she said. I wanted to prove myself all the time, prove I belonged, prove I was enough. Then one day, I just stopped. Why? Her eyes stayed on the skyline, where the city blinked like 1,000 stars. Because I realized peace is more important than pride. He nodded slowly, almost reverently. Then the elevator reached the 17th floor. The doors slid open with a sigh. They stepped into a long hallway bathed in golden light. The carpet beneath their feet plush and silent. Each door passed like a whisper. Until they reached Suite 1702, Julian unlocked the door, held it open, and Clara stepped inside. The suite was everything a tired soul could dream of. Cream-colored walls hugged the room in warmth. Fireplace flickered softly to the side, real. Flames, gentle and golden dot, heavy curtains framed tall windows, and beyond them. The city seemed quieter somehow, as if it too were holding its breath to listen. A soft, king-sized bed waited near the center, its pillows fluffed like clouds. Clara didn't go to the bed right away. She wandered first to the window, to the small table where a bowl of oranges sat beneath a handwritten card. Clara, welcome home. Love, always, Jay. Her eyes softened, not with tears, just fullness. She toed off her shoes and sat cross-legged on the velvet chaise by the fireplace. Her body melted into it, the way trees lean when the wind is warm. Julian watched from the doorway for a moment, as if he didn't want to disturb the scene, then quietly stepped out of his coat, crossed the room. He didn't speak. Instead, he knelt beside her, unlaced her shoes with care, took the hair tie from her wrist, and gently tugged the band from her ponytail. Her hair spilled down, loose and soft. You're beautiful, he murmured. She smiled, not because she needed to hear it, but because he meant it. And sometimes, the meaning matters more than the words. He stood and reached for a blanket, a soft knitted thing in pale gray, and wrapped it around her shoulders. The fire crackled gently, and for a long while, it was nothing but that sound. No need to speak, no need to explain. Just the simple, sacred quiet of being safe and seen downstairs. The lobby had shifted. Marissa and Lucas stood behind the desk, still working, but something was different now. Lucas had offered to cover Marissa's next few shifts. She didn't say thank you, but she didn't say no either. They both had learned something. About assumptions, about judgment, and perhaps about the quiet power of someone who doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. Guests whispered. Staff watched their tone, not out of fear, but out of the memory of what they'd witnessed. A woman, simple and soft, turning dignity into something you could feel. Upstairs, Clara had moved to the bed. She lay on her side, curled gently, the blanket still around her. Julian sat beside her, tracing small circles into her back. And finally, Clara whispered, "Do you ever wish I was different?" Julian blinked. "Different how, you know," she said slowly, more polished. "Like the other wives, dressed like this place belongs to me." Julian bent forward, kissed her temple. "This place does belong to you," he said softly. "Everything I've built, is because of who you are, not in spite of it. Clara closed her eyes, and for the first time that day, her breath deepened. Long, slow, safe, safe. Julian dimmed the lights. The city outside twinkled like it was telling her its own bedtime story, and within moments, she was asleep at peace, wrapped in the kind of stillness that only comes when your soul is understood. Outside the tall windows of Suite 1702, the city lights flickered gently, like stars exhaling. Far below, the streets softened into quiet, the last murmurs of the day giving way to the hush of night. But up here, above it all, wrapped in the still warmth of soft blankets and steady breath, Clara slept. Her chest rose and fell in a rhythm older than words, and beside her, Julian sat, still awake, watching her. Not because he had to, but because there are moments too perfect to interrupt. She looked so peaceful now, her hair fanned across the pillow like threads of soft brown silk, one arm tucked beneath her cheek, the other resting lightly over the blanket, fingers curled in a half-dream. He smiled, quiet and full. He thought of the first time he met her. Not at a gala, not at some glossy event, but in a sunlit classroom. It's filled with half-broken easels and the smell of paint. She was laughing then, not politely, but deeply, head tilted back. Joy spilling like light. A little boy beside her had drawn a portrait of her with purple hair and a crooked crown. She had framed it. That was Clara. She didn't wear elegance, she made it from dust. In crayons and cracked windows that let in more sky than they were supposed to, and now here she was. Still her. Still the woman who didn't care for diamonds, would stop to admire dandelions growing between cracks in the sidewalk. Still the woman who forgave too quickly, gave too freely. Still the woman who walked into a palace in her oldest sneakers and asked only for a place to rest. Julian reached for the small notebook on the nightstand, leather-bound. Pages half-filled with sketches and notes. Clara's journal. He didn't read it. He never did, but he liked to hold it sometimes. To remind himself that even in her quiet, she was always writing something beautiful. He set it down gently, careful, not to wake her. Then he leaned back against the headboard, letting the warmth of the room melt over him. The fireplace still glowed. The shadows on the walls moved slowly, like stories being whispered between the light and time. Seemed to slow down, back downstairs. The lobby had changed. It wasn't just quieter, it was humbler. Lucas had stopped pretending to be busy, and had begun reading the employee handbook again. Not out of fear, because for the first time, he realized he hadn't read the values written on page 1. Respect, kindness, integrity. Simple words, easy to ignore. Until someone like Clara made you remember what they looked like. Marissa stood at the side of the counter now, no longer scrolling through her phone between check-ins. She'd asked to speak to the head of guest relations, requested training on how to better handle assumptions. Said it out loud. I made a mistake, she admitted, and though it stung, saying it felt better than hiding behind it. Sometimes shame can grow into something useful when watered with honesty. And somewhere between the marble floors and gold chandeliers, a small shift began. Up in the suite, the clock ticked past midnight. Julian had finally dozed off. Still half sitting up, his arm resting beside Clara's, fingers gently touching the edge of her sleeve. Outside, the moon hung low and soft. Clouds passed slowly like drifting thoughts, each one a lullaby in its own quiet language, and in her dream. Clara stood barefoot in a sunlit field. Children laughed in the distance, brushes dipped in paint. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers and wood smoke. She was home, not in a hotel, not even in their cottage, but in the feeling of enough love, enough peace, enough truth. The kind of dream that leaves behind something real. When the sun began to stretch its first fingers over the skyline, Clara stirred. She blinked slowly, not jolting awake, but rising gently from sleep, the way one would rise from warm water. Julian was still there, eyes closed, breathing, slow. She smiled, slipped out of bed, moved to the window. The city glowed now, golden and new, like it had forgiven. The Nightin was ready to try again. She stood there a while, just stood, and when Julian finally stirred and saw her silhouetted in morning light, he said softly, "Don't move." She turned, puzzled. "Why?" "Because this," he whispered, "this is what grace looks like." Clara smiled softly, not the kind of smile that demands to be seen, but the kind that settles into a face, that lives there, the kind of smile that says, "I know who I am, even when others forget." She turned back to the window, lifting a hand to brush her hair behind her ear, and said in a voice that was still laced with sleep, "I dreamed I was painting a wall. In each brush stroke whispered something kind to me." Julian sat up slowly, resting his arms on his knees. "And what did they say?" he asked, his voice hoarse with the velvet of morning. She thought for a moment that I'm allowed to be soft, she said, that I don't have to become hard just because the world is. Julian closed his eyes. Briefly, let those words hang in the golden air between them. He loved her most in these moments, when she wasn't trying to be profound, but somehow always was. A knock came at the door. Light measured. Julian moved to answer, his bare feet soft against the warm wood floor. When he opened it, a bellhop stood there, nervously balancing a breakfast tray. "Mr. Elmont," he said quickly, then bowed slightly toward Clara in the background. Now, seated on the window bench, I just wanted to say, "I'm sorry, ma'am." Clara looked over gently, brows lifted in quiet curiosity. The bellhop continued, "I wasn't even at the desk last night, but we all heard, and I just wanted to say it. I think I needed to." Julian stepped back, allowing him to roll the tray in. Clara rose and met him halfway. "Thank you," she said softly. "Apologies don't erase what happened, but they do plant something better." The young man nodded, clearly affected, and left quietly after placing the tray down a steaming pot of tea. Warm croissants, sliced oranges, and a folded morning paper. Julian sat beside her again. Pouring her a cup, Clara watched the steam rise, let curling like breath into the new day. Then she laughed softly. "What?" he asked. "I was just thinking," I said, stirring a spoon of honey into her tea. "If I had come in wearing heels and a blazer, none of that would have happened." Julian didn't argue. He didn't need to. Instead, he said, "But then they never would have had the chance to learn what grace looks like." She glanced at him sideways, amused. "You're very poetic in the mornings." He grinned. "I'm inspired." By mid-morning, Clara had dressed a simple white cotton dress, the kind that breathed with her, hair loosely tied. No makeup, no performance. They took the private elevator down, and as the doors opened into the lobby again, the same lobby that had swallowed her in silence just hours before, it felt different. Like the walls themselves remembered what had happened, and were waiting to see what she would do next. Marissa was at the desk again. She saw. Clara, before Clara saw her, stood straighter, and when Clara approached, Marissa stepped. Around the counter, her voice, when it came, was steady. "Mrs. Elmont, I wanted to. I need to say—" "You don't need to say anything," Clara said gently. But she smiled, warm, real, and that smile cracked something open in Marissa's posture, as if a burden she didn't realize she'd been carrying had just slipped off her shoulders. "I hope you'll stay with us again," Marissa said. "Quieter now." Clara nodded. "I will, but not because it's luxurious, because it's changing." And she turned and walked with Julian toward the exit. The same. Revolving doors spun again, but this time, the woman passing through them didn't feel like a stranger. She felt like she belonged, not because of her name, not because of who she married, but because kindness had earned its place. Outside, the sun lit the sidewalk with gold. The world bustled gently, still waking up, taxi doors opening, coffee carts steaming, pigeons fluttering like soft punctuation in the air. Julian opened the door to the waiting car. But Clara paused, looked back, and for just a moment, smiled at the hotel one last time, not with resentment, not with triumph, but with something softer. Forgiveness and maybe, just maybe, pride. Because not every revolution needs fire. Some begin with a whisper. A gentle woman simply refused to match the cruelty given to her, and that was the story the walls of the Elmont Grand would remember. The car doors closed with a gentle click. The engine hummed low, soft murmur beneath their feet, and as the driver pulled away from the curb, Clara leaned her head against the window. Outside, the city blurred. Trees, signs, faces, all blending into a watercolor of movement and morning light. Inside, it was quiet, the kind of stillness that follows a storm that passed without thunder. Julian reached for her hand. She didn't speak, just curled her fingers into his, letting their palms rest together, warm, familiar, safe. He watched her from the corner of his eye. Her reflection in the glass looked, it's almost like a painting, peaceful, serene, rooted. It wasn't just the clothes or her soft skin or the curve of her cheek, it was the way she held herself. Without armor, without performance, just being, fully herself. He exhaled slowly, as if he, too, had been holding tension without knowing it. I kept thinking last night, Clara said suddenly, her voice soft, how easy it is to disappear when you don't fit into someone's idea of important. Julian squeezed her hand. I saw you, he said gently. I know, she whispered. That's why I'm okay. She turned to face him. Do you think they'll remember me? Julian tilted his head, thoughtful. Not just remember, he said. I think you unfolded something in them, something small but alive. Clara smiled, eyes distant. Good. That's enough for me. When they reached home, a quiet house just outside the city, where the hills breathed slowly and wildflowers bloomed in secret corners, Clara walked straight to the back garden. She didn't go to her studio, didn't check her phone, didn't unpack. She kicked off her shoes, barefoot in the grass, and let the earth hold her. Julian stood by the porch, watching her with a gentle kind of wonder. She crouched near the roses, ran her fingers along the softest petals, then closed her eyes, there in the shade of the birch trees. Time stopped. The birds sang overhead. A breeze kissed her cheeks. The hum of bees wove in and out of the leaves. She wasn't thinking about the hotel anymore. Not about the stairs, or the humiliation, or the apology. She was thinking about the little boy yesterday, the one who had painted a red sun because, in his words, yellow suns are too quiet. She was thinking about how beauty lives in strange places, how grace often wears simple shoes, how power doesn't always enter loudly, sometimes it walks in and whispers. Later that afternoon, Julian joined her with a glass of lemonade in each hand. She took one, sipped quietly, then looked up at him from where she sat cross-legged in the grass. Do you remember what you said the night we met? She asked. Julian chuckled. Which part? The part where you looked at the art on the wall, all crooked and childish, and said, It's the best gallery I've ever seen. He nodded, smiling. I wasn't lying. Clara tilted her head. You didn't even know I was the teacher then. Julian sat beside her on the grass. I knew enough. I knew someone was helping those kids believe they could shape the world with color. I knew someone saw magic in scribbles. He leaned closer, and I knew I wanted to know. That someone. She laughed softly, laid her head against his shoulder. It's funny, she whispered. The world tries so hard to convince us we need to be something more, when all we ever needed was to be fully, deeply ourselves. Julian kissed her hair. That, he said, is why you'll always be unforgettable. Ah! And as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in streaks of honey and rose, Clara closed her eyes again, not to sleep, but to listen, to the breeze, to her own heartbeat, to the quiet strength she had carried all along, and somewhere far away. In a grand hotel full of polished floors and second thoughts, her name was still being whispered, Clara Elmont. The woman who walked in quietly was turned away and left a lesson behind louder than any storm. A story not of revenge, but of grace, of softness, that stood taller than pride ever could. Night had returned, not suddenly. No, it came like a gentle tide, rolling in with soft navy shadows and a breeze that whispered through the curtains. Inside their cottage, everything glowed with evening calm. The lights were dim, golden. The kind of lighting that made you want to speak softly, or not at all. Clara moved slowly through the kitchen, barefoot, wearing a long cotton robe, the color of oat milk. The kettle hummed softly, low and steady sound like an old lullaby. She poured the tea. Honey chamomile. The scent floated through the air, warm and floral, like the end of a perfect sentence. Julian stood in the doorway, just watching. Not because she was doing anything extraordinary, but because she had a way of making the ordinary feel sacred. The way she moved with intention, the way her presence made silence feel full, not empty. He stepped forward, wrapping his arms around her from behind. His chin resting on her shoulder, she leaned back into him with a soft sigh. "I didn't think the day would end like this," she whispered. "Better?" he asked. She nodded much. They stayed like that for a while, wrapped in warmth, in stillness, in the kind of quiet that only happens when you've said everything that matters without speaking. Later, they sat on the back porch. The stars had begun to bloom in the sky. Slow and steady, not all at once, just appearing one by one, like shy guests arriving at a late-night gathering. Clara traced her fingers along the rim of her mug. "I wonder," she said quietly, "how many people are turned away each day. Not because they lack something, because others can't see what's already there." Julian was quiet for a moment, then probably more than we'd like to admit. She looked up at him, her face bathed in starlight. "That's why it matters," she whispered. "How we treat the ones no one notices." Julian turned toward her, his expression gentle. "And what about how we treat ourselves?" Clara smiled. "A work in progress." He laughed under his breath. "Aren't we? All." The wind stirred the leaves, far off in the distance. An owl called. The world was still. Clara rested her head on Julian's shoulder again, their mugs empty, but their hearts full. She had never wanted a big life, never dreamed of spotlights or stages. All she ever wanted was to help people feel seen. And somehow, that quiet dream had changed more than she ever realized. Julian reached for her hand. "You changed the air in that lobby yesterday," he said softly. "I don't think you even know it. You shifted something." Clara said nothing, only looked up, and let a single tear slide down her cheek. Not from sadness, but from a deep, aching peace, the kind of emotion that rises when everything in you whispers. You did the right thing, even when no one believed you at first, even when they doubted your worth, even when it would have been easier to walk away that night. When Clara finally returned to bed, the room felt even softer than before. The linens smelled faintly of lavender. The air was cool against her skin. She pulled the blankets up to her chin, curled onto her side, and let her body sink. Julian lay beside her, one arm gently across her waist. They didn't speak. Not anymore. Words had done their part. Now came the quiet, the healing silence that lulls even the busiest minds to stillness. Outside the window, the stars blinked slowly. The garden whispered secrets to the wind. And somewhere, far from the hush of the hills, in a hotel made of gold and glass, a few more people fell asleep differently than they had the night before. A little softer, a little humbler, a little more aware. And Clara slept, like someone who had finally laid down not just her body, but her burden. She slept like a woman who no longer needed to be seen to be real, who no longer needed to explain her worth to those who couldn't see past the surface. She slept, wrapped in her own quiet truth, and in her dreams she painted each brushstroke. A reminder that grace doesn't shout, it doesn't boast, it simply is. And in her dreams, Clara stood before a great blank canvas. It stretched endlessly, wide as the sky, tall as her imagination, the edges blurred into mist. The only sound was the soft echo of her breath. She held a brush in her hand, the bristles were dipped in light, not paint, but something softer, warmer, something alive. She took a step forward and painted, not pictures, not portraits, but feelings. Her first brushstroke was forgiveness. It flowed across the canvas in a golden wave, warm and shimmering. Like honey poured in sunlight, then came dignity, cool blue and strong, a line that curved upward like the neck of a swan. Kindness, soft lavender. Truth, a deep green dot. And as she painted, the canvas responded. It didn't just absorb the strokes. It breathed them in, glowed. From somewhere unseen, a gentle wind began to stir, as if the canvas had become sky, as if her truth had become weather. And in the distance, small figures gathered, not faces she knew, but feelings she recognized. The child who had been ignored, the woman overlooked, the man carrying burdens without a name. They all stood watching her, paint, not clapping, not cheering, just witnessing, being with her, understanding. And Clara, she didn't turn to speak, didn't need to. The painting said everything. It whispered in color, "You are not what they assume. You are what you carry quietly, what you give without being asked. What? You forgive without applause." The dream swirled gently, shifting. Now she was walking through a hallway of memories. Each door she passed held a version of herself. There her at 16, sketching in the back of math class. There her at 24, crying in her car after an interview where they said she wasn't quite polished enough. She touched the door frames softly as she passed, not opening them, just honoring them, because every version of her deserved love, even the messy ones, even the misunderstood ones, especially those. And when she reached the final door, it opened before she touched it. Inside was a mirror, but not just glass. The reflexio. The reflection didn't show her face, it showed her light. The soft, glowing truth of who she was, stripped of titles, clothes, and expectations. It pulsed gently, like a heartbeat. She watched it. It watched her, and slowly it nodded, as if to say, "Yes, you are enough. Even here, even now, back in the real world." Clara turned in her sleep, curling deeper under the blanket. A soft smile graced her lips. Julian stirred but didn't wake. His hand instinctively found hers. Beneath the covers, their fingers met like puzzle pieces, even in dreams. And the night deepened. Outside, the wind hushed. The stars blinked slower. Time itself seemed to pause, just for a moment, to rest alongside them in every room of the cottage. Peace had settled like a soft dusting of snow, quiet, cool, complete. And in the garden, under moonlight, the roses swayed gently as if nodding in approval, because even flowers know there is strength in softness, there is victory in dignity. And sometimes, the quietest woman in the room is the one they'll never forget. The dreams softened further. Now Clara was floating, not through water, but through time. Memories passed beneath her like slow-moving clouds. There was the day she first picked up a paintbrush, her tiny fingers sticky with glue, her eyes wide, as her mother said, "Just draw what you feel." Then the moment she stood on a worn stage at the community center, speaking to a crowd of parents about how art could heal children too young to understand grief. And later still, the day she told Julian, "I don't want to change who I am to stand beside you. I want to remain who I am and be seen." Each memory floated by, and with each one, Clara felt lighter. Not because the memories were perfect, many were not. Some were lonely, some were hard, but they were hers. And when you own your story, it cannot be used against you. She drifted slowly downward, like a feather. And when her feet touched something solid, soft grass beneath her, the same field from before. The sky stretched high above her, painted in soft purples and rose golds. The horizon shimmered, not with buildings, but with possibility. She looked down. In her hand was a flower, delicate blue. She brought it to her chest and felt it pulse, alive, connected in the real world. The moon had begun its descent. The night was slipping away, minute by minute, quiet as breath. Inside the bedroom, shadows stretched softly across the walls. The air was still. Clara lay perfectly still, but if you looked closely, you'd see her lips move slightly, as if whispering a word only dreams could hear, and far away in the city. In the grand hotel where it all began, the story of Clara Almont had begun to grow. It was told in hushes. Between night staff on their shift change, I heard she didn't yell. Not once. Did you see the way he looked at her? Like the sun rises just to light her face, and she forgave them. Just like that, in the guest lounge, two women talked over tea. I wonder if I would have recognized her, one said. I hope I would have smiled. I hope I wouldn't have judged. In the manager's office, a new policy draft sat on the desk. Every guest is someone's loved one. Assume grace before wealth. Dignity before display. Clara didn't know it yet, but she had started. Something, not just a story, a shift, a quiet rebalancing of values, the kind of thing that doesn't show up in headlines, but lingers in human behavior. The morning light crept through the edges of the curtains, soft, warm, gentle as a kiss on the forehead. Clara stirred. Her eyes fluttered open. Slowly, not jarred, not alarmed, just woken by light itself. Julian was still beside her. One arm draped across her waist, steady. His breath moved through his chest like a lullaby. She watched him for a moment, then turned onto her back and stared. At the ceiling, pale and glowing with morning gold, there was no rush, no urgency. She had nowhere to be, except exactly where she was. And that was enough. She reached for her journal, not because she had something grand to say, but because the moment felt full. She wrote only one sentence. I was not loud, but I was true. Then she closed the book and smiled. The kettle whistled in the kitchen, soft, familiar, the kind of sound that felt like home. Clara padded across the hardwood floor. Wrapped in a warm shawl, the hem of it brushed her ankles. Whispering with each step, she moved slowly, not out of tiredness, but peace. The kind of movement that comes when you're no longer rushing to prove anything. She poured the water gently. Watching the steam curl up from her mug, the tea leaves unfurled like tiny petals, releasing their quiet aroma into the morning air outside. The garden basked in light, petals turned upward. Bees stirred. The sky washed clean by dawn. Stretched pale and endless above the hills, Clara brought her tea to the porch, sat in her usual spot, the old wicker chair with the faded cushion, the one Julian insisted on replacing every spring, and she insisted on keeping it creaked under. Her weight just slightly, but that creak had become a sound she loved. It reminded her that things could be worn. And still good? She took a sip. The warmth moved down her throat and settled into her chest. She closed her eyes just for a moment. Just to be. Julian appeared behind her. A blanket draped over one shoulder, his hair tousled with sleep. Morning, he murmured, leaning down to kiss her temple. She replied, without opening her eyes. He settled beside her with a sigh, the kind that meant, I'm glad we're here for a while. He said nothing. The only sounds were the gentle rustling of leaves, the distant chirp of a bird, and the soft clink of ceramic against lips. Clara finally spoke. I was thinking last night. Julian turned, his head waiting, about how many versions of me I've been, and how each one of them would have handled yesterday so differently. Julian raised a brow. It's curious. She smiled faintly. 20-year-old Clara would have cried in the elevator. 20-5-year-old. Clara would have marched out the front door and never looked back. But this Clara? She shrugged. This Clara just stood still and let the world catch up. Julian's face softened. She's my favorite version, he said. Clara laughed quietly, then sipped her tea. I think she's mine too. And on at the meet she'll know. Now Elmont Grand Hotel change had already begun. The receptionist desk was quieter now, more attentive. Staff looked people in the eye. When they spoke to them, no matter what they wore, no matter what they carried, the general manager called for sensitivity training, not out of PR fear, but because he couldn't shake the look on Julian's face, the look of someone whose entire world had been dismissed in an instant. Clara's name wasn't printed in brochures, it wasn't mounted on the walls, but it was spoken in back rooms. In manager meetings, in the breath of staff who now paused before assuming, they called it the Clara reminder. Before you decide who someone is, remember Clara, back on the porch? The morning was unfolding slowly. A butterfly landed near Clara's toes. She smiled, sipped again. Julian leaned back in his chair, letting the sun hit his face, and for the first time in a long while, they didn't speak of what was next. No meetings, no trips, no questions, just the now, and the now was perfect. That afternoon, Clara returned to her studio. The space smelled of paint and paper, earthy and sweet. Memory. Sunlight poured through the tall window. Catching flecks of dried color on the floor, she stood before a blank canvas again. The real kind. This time, she didn't sketch, didn't plan, she just began soft, strokes slow, intentional. She didn't paint what happened at the hotel, she painted what grew from it. A field of wildflowers, each one unique, unlabeled, unafraid, in the corner. Added a single woman. Small, barefoot. Standing in the middle of it all with her eyes closed and her arms open, receiving everything, and needing nothing more as the sun dipped low that day. An evening light filled the windows. Julian peeked in from the hallway. He smiled, watched her. Watched the way her body moved with the brush. Watched the way peace radiated from her like light from a lantern, and in that quiet moment, as the painting bloomed in front of her, Clara felt it, that soft knowing, that quiet truth, that all the noise in the world could never drown the sound of her own voice, and that voice was enough. Evening returned slowly, as if it too wanted to savor the calm. The light in the studio grew softer, turning everything gold. Paintbrushes cast long shadows on the table. The breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of rosemary and distant rain. Clara stepped back from the canvas. Her hand still held the brush, though. She hadn't added a new stroke in minutes. She simply stood. Observing, the woman in the field now had a smile, small, content, unbothered. Her eyes were still closed, but her face was peaceful, not triumphant, not proud, just that. Clara nodded gently. It felt finished. Not in the sense of being complete. No art ever truly is, but in the way a song ends. It's with just the right note, nothing more needed, nothing less deserved. She set the brush in a jar of water, watched. The colors swirl outward like memory dissolving into time. Then she wiped her hands on her apron and stepped out into the soft evening light. Julian was in the kitchen. He had tied a tea towel around his waist in that charmingly serious way he always did when cooking something simple and loving. Chickpeas simmered in a pan. Warm bread was wrapped in cloth. A pot of jasmine rice steamed beside it all. Fragrant and familiar, Clara leaned against the doorway. "I painted her," she said. Julian turned, eyebrows raised. "The version of me that stood in that lobby," Clara said. She wasn't angry. She was awake. Julian smiled. "You're collecting pieces of yourself. That's good." She stepped into the room, wrapping her arms gently around his middle. "There. Easier to love when I stopped trying to make them look like someone else. Like someone else." He kissed the top of her head. "And they've always loved you." They ate on the porch, not because it was special, but because it had. It's become their quiet tradition. Plates in their laps. The last light fading into blue. The crickets just beginning. Their nightly chorus. Julian broke off a piece of bread and passed it to Clara. She dipped it in the warm chickpeas. Then paused. "You know what I thought about? right before the receptionist dismissed me. Julian looked over, I thought. "Wait," she said slowly, about how people forget to see each other. "We walk past hundreds of stories every day, and we act like they don't matter unless they wear a suit or shine." He nodded slowly, and I thought. She continued, "Maybe that's why I had to go through it, so I'd never stop seeing." Julian rested his plate on the side table. "You already see more than most, Clara. You don't need permission for that." She looked at him, eyes soft. "I know. But maybe someone needed to see me too." The night wrapped around them like a familiar blanket. Later in bed, Clara ran her fingers across the fabric of the sheets, slow, absent-minded. Julian was already drifting. His breathing had that weight to it, steady, rooted in rest. But Clara remained still for a while longer. Not restless, just reflective. Her thoughts weren't racing. They moved gently, like leaves across a slow stream. She thought about the bellhop who apologized, the receptionist who didn't meet her eyes, the woman who said nothing at all but stared, as if seeing a ghost. Each reaction had taught her something, and what amazed her most was that she hadn't felt the need to shrink, not once, not even in the silence. She reached over and turned off the lamp. Darkness moved in gently. Like an old friend, the wind sighed outside the window. The trees whispered, and inside the quiet, Clara breathed, deeply, fully, like someone who no longer needed to explain why they deserved space. She closed her eyes and let the dark hold her. Sleep took her gently, not like a wave crashing in, but like the tide pulling her slowly into warmth. She drifted through a darkness that wasn't empty, full of breath, full of peace, full of everything she'd earned simply by being true. In her dream, she stood on a bridge of light, beneath her stars, not sky, not water, but stars, stretching in every direction. Each one pulsed gently, as if alive, as if whispering stories of other lives, other moments, all connected. She walked slowly, barefoot each, step light and certain. The bridge didn't wobble, didn't shift. It held her. Completely from the far side, a figure waited, not threatening, not mysterious, just still. And as she neared, she saw it was her. Not the Clara of now, not even the Clara from the hotel, but the first Clara, the one who had once stood in front of a cracked mirror, adjusting her collar, practicing how to sound confident. The one who smiled too much in interviews, hoping it would make up for what she didn't wear. Young Clara. Hopeful Clara. She was waiting with open arms, and when they met, no words were spoken, no explanations, no apologies, just an embrace. One that said, "You've done well. You've stayed soft in a world that wanted you sharp. You've stayed open when it was easier to close. You've made it." And the moment their hands met, and the stars below pulsed brighter, just once, as if in quiet celebration. Back in the room, Julian stirred slightly, not awake, not fully, but aware enough to move closer to Clara, his arm reaching gently for her waist in his sleep. Their bodies, even in unconsciousness, knew how to find each other, how to say, "I'm here." And Clara, still dreaming, let out a small sigh, the kind of sound that lives at the edge of waking, soft, safe, outside. The trees stood tall in moonlight. Their leaves rustled gently. The wind played a lullaby across their branches. Even the earth seemed to be sleeping now, far away in the city. In the hotel, in the rooms where her name had been spoken in tones of regret, people had gone to sleep, changed. Not because of discipline, not because of policy, but because someone had walked in without noise, had stood still, and shown them who they were becoming without saying a word. And that kind of transformation, it lingers. It grows like roots beneath the surface, quiet, unseen, but strong. In her dream, Clara had crossed the bridge. The stars behind her faded slowly, not gone, just complete. She stepped into a garden. Not her garden, not the one behind her home, but a dream garden. One where the trees had silver bark, and the flowers opened their petals in time with her breathing. Where the sky changed colors with her thoughts. Soft lavender when she felt grateful. Warm amber when she remembered love. She walked between rows of blooms, brushing her fingertips along them. Each one whispered, not words, just feeling. A flash of joy, a breath of healing, a slow exhale of everything that didn't need to be carried. Anymore, she sat by a still pond. Her reflection looked up at her with kind eyes. No judgment, no tiredness, just presence. She smiled at herself, and the pond smiled back in the real world. The clock ticked past 3 a.m., the moon had begun its descent. The stars dimmed just slightly, giving the sky back to morning. But in the house, in the bed, Clara slept. On, breathing slow, steady, held by love, by truth, by the knowledge that she had never needed to become anyone else. To be enough she already was, always had been in the garden of her dream. Clara stood once more. This time the trees leaned in gently. The wind moved slower. Everything, the flowers, the grass, the sky seemed to breathe with her, as if the whole world was exhaling with her. For her, she walked until she reached a small wooden bench beneath a glowing tree. Its bark shimmered faintly, like it had been brushed with moonlight, and hanging. From its branches were tiny lanterns, not made of metal, but of soft, living light. Each one pulsed slowly. In rhythm with her heartbeat, she sat, closed her eyes, and as she did, she heard something, not loud, not jarring, just a quiet voice, not outside of her, but within. You are safe, you are seen, you are loved. With every breath the words repeated, but slower, softer, like distant. Waves against a shore, you are safe, you are seen, you are loved. Her shoulders relaxed deeper, her jaw unclenched, even her hands, which so often carried the weight of others' expectations, rested gently in her lap. She wasn't performing, she wasn't proving, she was just being, and it was enough, back in bed. Her breathing mirrored the dream, soft inhale, long exhale. The room held its silence with reverence, as though it understood the sacredness of sleep earned through grace. Julian, beside her, shifted ever so. Slightly, still asleep, still close. Even in the quiet hours, when the world forgets itself. Their bodies remembered each other. He exhaled her name without knowing it. Clara, a whisper into the dark, unheard by ears, but maybe felt by her soul. In her dream, the bench beneath the tree began to dissolve, not vanish, just fade. The final notes of a lullaby, the lanterns lifted slowly into the sky, becoming stars again. The glowing tree returned to stillness. Clara stood, turned once more to face the path she'd come from. And there, the very end of it, stood a doorway. Not grand, not golden, just familiar, like the front door of her childhood home. The kind you knew how to open, without thinking, the kind that always creaked in the same spot. She walked toward it barefoot, unhurried. The grass beneath her feet felt warm and forgiving. And as she reached the door, she paused, listened, felt her heartbeat slow. Even more, then she opened it and stepped through. Light, gentle, golden, like sunrise filtering through a bedroom window. She wasn't in the dream anymore. She was in the edge of waking, that soft, hazy space between sleep and morning. Where everything feels soft and right. Clara didn't open her eyes. Not yet, but she smiled. Because even without looking, she knew she was home. Not just in her house. Not just beside Julian, but in herself. She was rested, whole, and quietly powerful. Far beyond the cottage, the world was waking. The streets of the Elmont Grand would begin to fill again. Coffee would pour, luggage would roll, guests would check in and out. But something would be different. Now, not visible to everyone, but there. In the way the receptionist made eye contact, in the way the bellhop carried a suitcase like it mattered, in the way they paused just briefly before judging Clara, had left no plaque, No note, no headline. But her grace had stayed behind, soft and unforgettable. Back in bed, the first rays of sunlight warmed the edges of the quilt. Julian stirred. Clara's eyes opened. Just slightly. She blinked once, then twice. And breathed deeply, not because she had to, but because it felt good to exist in this moment, to know that everything led her here, not to a throne, not to applause, but to quiet, to peace, to a home in her own skin. And as her feet touched the floor, and the day began. Again, she carried it all with her. The woman they tried to dismiss. The woman they looked past. The woman they should have known better than. To underestimate, she had no crown, no riches, just quiet truth. And truth, after all, is the softest kind of power. Clara stood at the window now. The light touched her face softly, as if greeting an old friend. Outside, the world was beginning its quiet routines. Birdsong, footsteps. On gravel, the distant hum of morning life returning. But inside, all was still. Julian moved behind her, wrapping an arm around her waist. He didn't say good morning. He didn't need to. She leaned back into him, letting her head rest against his shoulder. For a while, they simply breathed together. No words, no decisions, just presence. She walked into her studio once more that morning. The painting from the night before stood on the easel waiting, not asking for more. Just being. Clara tilted her head, then picked up a brush. Just one more stroke. A tiny one. A flower she hadn't noticed was missing. Near the edge of the field, a pop of soft yellow. Then she signed her name. Not big, not loud, just enough in. The bottom corner, she wrote in delicate strokes. Seen, heard, whole. And below it, just her initials. She placed the painting by the window to dry. Let the light kiss the canvas one last time. Then she walked out into the garden barefoot, letting the dew cool her skin. The grass, the soil, the breeze, all welcomed. Her back, she sat beneath her favorite tree, the one with the bent branch and the squirrel hole. Near the roots, and closed her eyes. The morning was quiet, but her heart was full. She didn't need the world to remember her. She didn't need the hotel, the staff, or the stairs to change who she was. They'd only reminded her of the truth she already carried, that grace does not bow to power, that kindness is not weakness, and that self-worth is not something you wear, it's something you live. And so she lived it softly daily. In her walk, in her work, in every child she taught to paint what they feel, instead of what the world told them to see. Julian, always beside her, never ahead, never. Behind, present, two souls walking forward, unconcerned with applause. And you, dear listener, as you lie there breathing slowly, feeling the world settle around you like a soft blanket, let Clara's story hold you. Let it remind you that your presence is not measured by recognition, that your softness is not something to fix, it is your gift, that the world may not always see you at first. But that doesn't mean you aren't brilliant or worthy or whole, because you are just as you are right now in this moment. Unapologetically real. Undeniably enough. Let your breath slow even further now. Let your eyes soften, your body sink. There's nowhere to go, nothing left to do. You've arrived in your stillness, in your strength, in your truth, and now it's time to rest. Let the night wrap around you like Clara's blanket. Let your dreams bloom. Like her painted wildflowers, let your soul drift, featherlight across a sky made just for you. And when you wake, may you rise like her, quiet, grounded. UNSHAKABLY. Hold good night. You are safe. You are seen. You are loved, always.